When wind towers started going up across the North Country about 20 years ago, you would not believe the destruction people against wind power were predicting. Shards of ice careening off the blades and harpooning people, low-frequency noise that would affect your brain, whole neighborhoods becoming ghost towns. These are actual anti-wind arguments I heard people make. Certainly not so far-fetched, but people are criticizing solar panels these days, accusing them of destroying farmland. So we look at the results so far. That's today's story of the day.
Support for Story of the Day comes from the Wild Center in Tupper Lake, dedicated to strengthening visitors' connections to the natural world. More at wildcenter.org.
Hey, I'm David Sommerstein. It's Monday. May the 4th be with you. First up, a controversial sign in the southern Adirondacks was vandalized over the weekend. The sign in North Creek encouraged people to vote in the next election and said President Donald Trump must be, quote, neutralized. According to the Adirondack Explorer, someone put a large hole in the middle of the sign late Saturday. The man who created the sign and who owns the property where it's displayed said he wasn't surprised that it was destroyed. According to the Explorer, some people in North Creek saw the sign as a threat to the president and viewed it as hate speech. The FBI and the county sheriff determined that it was protected by free speech. The sign owner told the Explorer he plans to keep the vandalized sign up for about a week before replacing it with one that's focused on the November election. Housing advocates want New York to expand its state law that ensures tenant protections to renters. Sajina Shrestha reports for the New York Public News Network.
Rachel Riley has been renting all her adult life. The Albany resident says while her wages have increased steadily over the years, the cost of her rent has outpaced the growth of her income.
I don't know when my wages is going to be going up next. Rent is ultimately taking up more and more of my income. And I need that income. I need that income for the rising cost of living, and I also need it for savings in my future.
Riley of the Hinkle United Tenants Union is among advocates pushing the state legislature to pass the Rent Emergency Stabilization Act. As part of an effort to expand rent regulation to more upstate communities, the bill would allow localities to consider new factors, such as local eviction rates, demand on homeless shelters, and other circumstances before declaring a housing emergency under the state's Emergency Tenant Protection Act. For the New York Public News Network, I'm Sajina Shrestha.
Solar energy development is polarizing rural communities like the North Country. Many people, including scientists, see solar as a critical piece to reduce our carbon emissions and slow the dangerous effects of climate change. But others fear solar will overtake farmland, robbing rural places of their main industry and pastoral charm. A new study from Cornell University reveals that those concerns might be overstated. Catherine Wheeler reports.
When developers are looking to build a new large-scale solar project that could potentially take up hundreds or thousands of acres, they often start by looking for farmland.
With fairly good reason from an efficiency standpoint.
That's Richard Stedman. He's the interim director of the Ashley School for Global Development and the Environment at Cornell University.
Ag land in general tends to be flatter, tends to often already have access in, like farm roads, access roads, and often with less vegetation that needs to be cleared.
Stedman says this strategy has led to a lot of speculation. Could solar spell the end for farming if the farmers can make better money from leasing or selling the land than from working it for crops? It's breeding fear in communities that rely on agriculture, where farming is both an economic driver and a cultural backbone. Stedman says there wasn't any data on it, so he and a team got to work surveying landowners in 3 counties, Genesee in western New York and St. Lawrence and Washington counties here in the North Country. He says they started by asking about landowners' opinions of solar development. The 2 biggest groups they found were on opposite sides of the spectrum, those who strongly support it and those who strongly oppose.
There was not a lot of middle ground. And so when you see the politics around solar energy developing, I think it's important to keep that in mind, is that we have a lot of folks who think it's a great idea and we should be moving ahead, and a lot of folks who think it's a really bad idea and we ought not to be moving ahead.
The analysis focused on those most likely to be approached by developers, landowners who have at least 30 acres of land and were near a substation or transmission lines. Stedman says they found about half of those surveyed had been approached by at least one solar developer, but more attention was paid to landowners who had farmland. They were about twice as likely to hear from developers versus non-farmland owners.
Of those who had been approached, whose signs and why, about 25%, about 1/4 of those who had been approached either had already signed a lease or intended to sign a lease. So there's a lot of drop-off, right, from folks who have been approached. 3/4 of them almost said, nope, I haven't signed and I don't intend to, and only about 1/4 of them said that they had signed or intended to sign. And again, we see a very different relationship with farming. Even though farmers were more likely to have been approached, they were also more likely to say no.
Then the questions drilled down even more. They asked the farmers who had said yes to a solar lease on their land what they intended to do next. About half of them said it wasn't going to affect their farming at all.
Of those who said it was going to affect their farming, they were 3 times more likely to say, the revenues that I get from leasing some of my land for solar, I plan to reinvest into farming. So it's going to keep me in farming. It's going to keep some of my land in farming into the future. So 39% of our respondents said, yep, it's going to help me stay in agriculture. And only 14% said, no, I think the money that we're going to get from this, might represent an exit strategy of sorts. So, sort of together, we take these findings that, at least sort of in thinking of what people say they're likely to do, we're not seeing necessarily as apocalyptic of a scenario for extreme loss of farmland, farm productivity as we sometimes hear.
Stedman says this data is a good signal for ag communities, but there are still plenty of concerns. He says communities are still thinking about cost versus benefit, like where this power goes, if it could bring down local energy prices, and who gets to be involved in the regulatory process and oversight.
Often, rural communities may or may not, I think rightly so, feel like a full participant in these discussions that are going to have very strong local effects. So I don't want these findings to be taken as, oh, we're not going to lose farmland, and so there's no worries, and we should all just, fall in place and love solar unconditionally. I don't think that's true.
Stedman says research like this about what's happening on the ground will be critical in the years to come as we continue the transition to renewable energy to combat climate change.
If we're thinking about rural land use, we can't ignore energy as one of the big drivers of future land use. And people care about land, and people care about communities.
Stedman says that's why he and the Cornell team are following up with more research. Next, they're looking at agrivoltaics, or the practice of farming or livestock grazing in the same place as solar panels. Another effort at untangling how solar is impacting people. Catherine Wheeler, North Country Public Radio.
NCPR's climate change coverage is made possible through the generous support of Margot and John Ernst. You can find more stories at ncpr.org/climate. We have more news all the time on our website, ncpr.org. Music today by the Saranac Project of Saranac Lake and Evan Veenstra of Gananoque, Ontario. I'm David Summerstein, North Country Public Radio.